Malaysia Airlines flight MH370's disappearance remains one of aviation's greatest mysteries. And now, almost 11 years after a British company was launched, what is likely to be the final stage, the final search.
For more than a decade, the world has carried a chilling question. When Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 vanished in 2014 with 239 people on board, it became one of aviation's darkest mysteries. No bodies were recovered. No major wreckage returned, only scattered fragments that deepened the uncertainty. Now, with a new search scheduled for December 30th, 2025, long-buried questions are rising again. Why were no passengers ever found? What do experts believe happened in the deep ocean? This documentary examines the evidence, the science, and the painful possibilities families still face. The vanishing that defied logic. When Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 departed Kuala Lumpur on March 8, 2014, nothing suggested that the routine overnight flight to Beijing would become the most confounding disappearance in aviation history. The aircraft, carrying 239 people, climbed to cruising altitude like countless flights before it. Yet only 39 minutes after takeoff, something happened that investigators still cannot fully explain. The plane vanished from civilian radar screens with shocking suddenness, leaving behind silence where there should have been communication and questions where there should have been answers. The pilot's final transmission, the calm and ordinary phrase, "Good night, Malaysian 370, became the last known human contact with the aircraft. Minutes later, the transponder stopped sending signals. That single loss of communication changed the entire course of the investigation. It suggested human involvement or a technical event that experts still debate. But what followed made the mystery even deeper. Military radar revealed that MH370 did not crash then. It turned back over the Malay Peninsula, crossed into the Andaman Sea, and continued flying for hours. Whoever or whatever redirected that plane set it on a path far from its intended route. The world expected debris, bodies, or distress signals in the days that followed. Instead, there was nothing, and that absence of evidence became its own kind of evidence. No distress call indicated that the crew may have been incapacitated or prevented from communicating. No early wreckage suggested that the aircraft stayed airborne until fuel exhaustion. Satellite data later supported this, showing a long, quiet journey into one of the most remote areas of the southern Indian Ocean, a place rarely traversed and almost impossible to search. Within days, search planes scoured the South China Sea, believing MH370 had crashed close to its known flight path. But this assumption set the investigation back significantly. Only later did analysts realize the early search zone was entirely wrong. That delay allowed currents, storms, and time to reshape any potential debris field. Even more devastating, it gave the ocean days of advantage over the teams trying to find signs of life. In those lost hours, the sea may have already taken the one thing families needed most: answers. By the time nations understood the aircraft had gone far off course, the trail had grown cold. Investigators faced an unsettling truth. They were no longer trying to rescue passengers. They were trying to locate proof that those passengers ever reached the ocean at all. And yet, the strange disappearance was only the beginning. What lay beneath the waves would challenge every assumption about what could be found, and how much the ocean can hide without mercy. The ocean that hides everything. The southern Indian Ocean is not just vast, it is one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. When investigators concluded that MH370 most likely ended its flight somewhere along the remote southern corridor, experts immediately understood the magnitude of the challenge. This region is known for towering waves, sudden storms, shifting currents, and water depths that reach nearly 2.5 miles. It is the kind of place where even large vessels struggle to survive, let alone fragile debris or human remains. From the moment MH370 crossed into this zone, the ocean became the most dominant force in the story. The absence of bodies or sizable wreckage is not just a product of mystery, it is a product of nature. In calmer waters, remains may float long enough to be located, giving rescuers a limited window to act. But the southern Indian Ocean does not allow such chances. Its immense pressure, cold temperatures, and violent currents work together to erase evidence with alarming efficiency. Marine experts have explained that when an aircraft impacts deep ocean water, especially at high speed, the forces involved can fragment debris and accelerate sinking far faster than most people imagine. Even wreckage that should have remained buoyant is subjected to relentless punishment. Waves in this region can rise to extraordinary heights, tearing apart weaker materials and scattering fragments across thousands of square miles. The few pieces that did eventually wash ashore years later, such as the flaperon on Réunion Island, were small, battered, and stripped of clues. Their appearance was a reminder not of survival, but of how violently the sea treats anything that enters it. The ocean floor adds another layer of difficulty. The seabed in this part of the Indian Ocean is uneven, riddled with deep trenches, ridges, and rock formations capable of burying objects instantly. Even with sonar and autonomous underwater vehicles, much of the terrain remains difficult to interpret. If MH370 broke apart upon impact, heavier components could have lodged in these underwater valleys, effectively becoming hidden from all but the closest inspection. And human remains, being far lighter and more vulnerable, would stand even less chance of remaining intact or discoverable in such conditions. Biologists also point out that decomposition underwater follows patterns dramatically different from those on land. Low temperatures slow decay, but the lack of oxygen and the presence of scavengers can cause remains to disappear long before search teams arrive. In the MH370 case, weeks passed before the correct search area was even identified, and by then, the ocean had already transformed whatever evidence might have existed. This is why, from the earliest days of the investigation, experts feared the truth. The ocean would not give up its secrets easily, and as search teams prepared to confront these realities, they would soon discover that nature was not the only adversary they faced. Time destroyed the evidence. Time is often a quiet destroyer, but in the case of MH370, it became one of the most decisive forces working against investigators. From the moment the aircraft disappeared, every hour mattered because the ocean never stays still. Currents shift, tides rise and fall. Storms churn the surface, and debris fields begin to stretch across unimaginable distances. Yet in the crucial first days, search efforts began in the wrong place. While vessels and aircraft combed the South China Sea, believing the plane had never deviated far from its route, the true crash site lay thousands of miles away. Precious days slipped by, and with them, the chance to capture early clues. By the time analysts realized the aircraft had traveled along the southern corridor toward the Indian Ocean, the game had already changed. Human remains that might have floated for a short period were likely long gone. Debris that could have been identifiable had already been carried far from the impact zone. The sea does not preserve, it disperses. Its currents can sweep fragments across entire coastlines, a fact proven when the first confirmed piece of MH370, the battered flaperon, washed ashore on Réunion Island in July 2015, more than a year after the disappearance. That discovery, while significant, illuminated a grim truth. Everything else had been drifting for just as long. Storms only accelerated the erasure. In the months following MH370's disappearance, seasonal weather struck the region again and again. Winds shifted debris paths, waves submerged floating objects, and sediment on the seafloor moved with each undercurrent. Time was not just passing, it was reshaping the evidence itself. Each delay meant that whatever clues remained were being altered, scattered, or destroyed beyond recognition. Even if bodies had surfaced initially, rough conditions would have taken them quickly. Investigators also struggled with evolving data. Satellite analysis, flight path modeling, and drift studies were all refined over time, but these improvements came too late to preserve the earliest traces of the tragedy. Search ships faced the daunting task of trying to reconstruct what had happened long after nature had already rewritten the scene. The deeper the investigation went into the timeline, the more it became clear that the ocean had been allowed too much time to work unchallenged. And yet, this reality forced a painful shift in the mission. The focus gradually moved away from recovering survivors or remains and toward locating any fragment of the aircraft that could offer answers. Families were told that some events, once enough time has passed, may never leave behind the evidence needed to resolve them fully. The disappearance of MH370 had crossed that threshold before the world even realized it. Still, the passage of time was not the only barrier standing in the way of truth. Human limitations, misjudgments, and logistical challenges created obstacles that proved equally damaging. Search limits that cost answers. The disappearance of MH370 triggered the largest and most complex search operation in aviation history. Yet even with international cooperation and massive resources, investigators quickly found themselves facing limitations they could not overcome. The mission began with urgency and global attention, but early confusion over the plane's actual path proved costly. Satellite data, military radar recordings, and flight path reconstructions were interpreted differently by various teams, leading to mismatched assumptions about where the aircraft had gone down. Days and weeks were spent searching areas that ultimately had nothing to do with the crash, allowing the real trail to grow colder with each passing hour. Even after the correct southern corridor was identified, the sheer size of the search zone created an overwhelming challenge. The most likely crash area spanned tens of thousands of square miles, much of it in some of the deepest waters on the planet. Search ships struggled to map the seafloor with precision because the underwater terrain was rugged and unpredictable. Autonomous underwater vehicles were deployed, but even they could cover only limited territory at a time. Every pass over the seabed required careful analysis, and false leads consumed valuable time. In many ways, the mission resembled trying to locate a single grain of sand in an endless desert. The weather created further barriers. The southern Indian Ocean is notorious for violent storms, extreme swells, and powerful winds that can halt operations instantly. Many missions were forced to retreat, suspend scanning, or change course to protect equipment and crew. These interruptions fractured the momentum of the search and prolonged the investigation. Even in 2025, when Ocean Infinity resumed efforts using advanced robotics, weather conditions forced the mission to pause soon after it began. The environment simply refused to cooperate. Another limitation came from the very nature of deep-sea technology. Sonar equipment and underwater drones are designed to identify large metallic objects, not human remains. Even if the main fuselage were located, recovering individual passengers would require specialized tools and operations far beyond what any government has attempted at comparable depths. The search, from the beginning, was designed to find a plane, not bodies. This reality meant that families were left waiting for answers that the mission was not equipped to provide. Financial and political pressures added further strain. As months turned into years, governments debated continued funding, and each suspended effort created new waves of frustration among the families. The 2018 Ocean Infinity search ended after 3 months, and only the possibility of new technology and refined data convinced Malaysia to approve another attempt in 2025. Despite these renewed efforts, the limits of past operations still cast a long shadow, and as search teams pushed against these constraints, families were left confronting their own battles, ones that carried emotional burdens far heavier than any technical challenge. Families without closure. For the families of MH370's passengers, time has not softened the loss. Instead, it has deepened it. With no bodies recovered and no definitive wreckage to explain what happened, they were forced into a grief that never reached completion. From Malaysia to China and beyond, loved ones waited for any confirmation, something tangible they could hold, bury, or mourn over. Instead, they received long stretches of silence, shifting reports, and investigations that felt trapped between uncertainty and hope. The absence of remains created a void that no announcement or official statement could ever fill. Every anniversary of the disappearance becomes a painful reminder of their unanswered questions. Families gather in Beijing, Kuala Lumpur, and other cities, holding photos and speaking the names of those they lost. They plead for renewed searches, not out of anger, but out of a need for truth. Many say that without remains, they cannot properly grieve. Instead of closure, they live with unresolved stories. Stories paused on March 8, 2014, with no conclusion in sight. For some, that emotional paralysis has lasted more than a decade. The absence of any physical proof likewise made it possible to consider the most painful possibilities. The relatives of some of the passengers feared that something much more complicated than just the deaths and non-existence of the crash site had occurred. Others were holding on to the dream that perhaps their dear ones had escaped and were hiding somewhere unknown. These thoughts were not products of fantasy, but rather of urgent need. With no evidence to rely on, the brain has no choice but to look for other ways out, even if they are not logical. The pain of losing a loved one becomes mixed with guessing, and families are stuck between their desire for the truth and the fear of what the truth might uncover. Their anger and angst were exacerbated by the constant interruptions of the search activities. The very first joint international effort closed in 2017, and this caused many relatives to feel that they had been deserted. The 2018 Ocean Infinity operation created a new glimmer of hope, but it was again ended without anything to show for it. When the 2025 search operation commenced, bad weather was the reason given for another stoppage. Each and every new beginning and ending was like their wounds being reopened. It wasn't just the discovery of the aircraft they were after. They were also after knowing how the people inside it died. They wanted to know the scenario of their last moments. They wanted to be able to bring them home with honor. Now, as Malaysia confirms the renewed mission set to resume on December 30th, 2025, families watch with guarded hope. They have learned not to celebrate too quickly. Yet they still hold on to the belief that even a small discovery, one piece of the fuselage, one personal item, could bring long-awaited answers. For them, the search is not just an investigation. It is the last remaining bridge between memory and closure, between loss and understanding. Still, even as hope rises again, experts remind the world that the ocean may hold truths deeper than any human effort can reach. Yet, the mission ahead carries a weight unlike any before it. The new search and the final possibilities. More than a decade after MH370 vanished, the world is once again preparing for a renewed search, one that many experts believe could be the final attempt to uncover the aircraft's fate. Beginning December 30th, 2025, Ocean Infinity will resume operations in a targeted 5,800 square mile zone of the southern Indian Ocean. Unlike earlier searches, this mission is built on newer data, refined drift models, and technology evolved from past attempts. Malaysia's government approved the operation under a no-find, no-fee agreement, signaling a commitment to pursue answers without hesitation. For families, this announcement stirred cautious hope, the kind shaped by years of disappointment. Ocean Infinity enters this mission with improved autonomous underwater vehicles capable of scanning vast areas more precisely than earlier tools. These machines can operate longer, dive deeper, and map the seabed with greater clarity. Specialists believe that if the wreckage is within this refined zone, the updated systems stand a stronger chance of detecting it. The search will proceed intermittently across 55 days, allowing teams to work around unpredictable weather conditions that have derailed efforts in the past. Every moment at sea is precious, but every moment is also vulnerable to the forces that complicate work in these hostile waters. Even though the aircraft's final resting place can be pinpointed using the latest technology, the so-called difficult truth pointed out by the professionals still holds. There is barely any hope of finding human remains after more than a decade. This part of the Indian Ocean is not fit for preserving organic matter. The conditions, high pressure, low temperature, and the sea life conspired to wipe out the evidence in a way that no remedy can make it visible again. Only the investigators may come across parts of the fuselage, landing gear, engines, or even some personal items. Still, these found objects, though not the closure that families had been hoping for, would be able to tell some important things like the plane's disintegration, depressurization, and the severity of impact. Nonetheless, the finding of the main wreck would change the investigation more than any previous discovery would have done. It could determine if the airplane glided or dropped, if a system failure occurred, or it was through manipulation. and if the disintegration of the structure accounted for the unavailability of remains. The wreckage has tales drawn into its metal, tales that can lead the connoisseurs to the long-hidden truths. There is not only hope, but also an organized scheme of unearthing the events of the plane's last hours for the first time in years. As the world watches the preparations unfold, a sense of gravity surrounds this mission. It may be the last large-scale attempt to locate MH370. If successful, it could finally bring answers to families who have waited through their grief with extraordinary strength. Thank you for watching. If you want deeper explorations of stories that shaped the world, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And when the next video appears on your screen, join us there as we uncover more stories that deserve to be told.